Here we're going to talk about how plant communities change over time. And this is a term that is referred to as succession. So succession can actually also refer to animals, but it generally refers to plants. So this is a change in a plant community over time, following a disturbance. So generally, we can talk about how changes after a disturbance tend to follow a particular pattern. And this pattern generally can be described as such. So we have annuals after a disturbance. And a disturbance could be like, for example, a flood, or it could be even a drought. It could also be a fire. So the annual plants come in, and these are the ones that have to reseed themselves every year. And sometimes these can be, or these generally are, weedy species. So like annuals would include, say, for example, dandelions are annuals. So then we have perennials. So these are the plants that can survive over the entire course of the year and from one year to the next. And then we could have bushes and then trees. So this is a pattern of succession that typically happens that we see in plant communities. Now, it's important to note that not all communities go to the end where we see trees. And so an example would be a grassland. So in a grassland, we see that there's not enough precipitation to support bushes and trees. And so we stop with perennial grasses, right? So a good example of this would be shown in this diagram, where we could look at the years of just after the years of disturbance and the relative abundance. And this is like cover, so percent cover of the ground. So we can see in this example that we have these annuals like ragweed and quack grass, right, that come up, and they are the ones that colonize. Sometimes they're called pioneer species. And then what we see over time is that other species take over. So you can see that the composition of the community changes over time, which is the definition of succession. So then we get over here in this part of the graph, say we get perennial grasses like big blue stem and little blue stem and bluegrass. And so these are grasses that stay for long periods of time. Now, sometimes they call this end of whatever the succession is, what is referred to as the climax community. So we can talk about our climax community. So a community, again, is different species. Climax generally means that this is the community that tends to live and be relatively stable over long periods of time. So we can say that the plant and animal species that tend to remain for an extended period of time. Plant and animal communities that tend to remain for an extended period of time. So it's important to note that this is not always, there's no bad community and better community. And so the idea of climax community is important because specifically, if we're trying to restore an ecosystem after a major disturbance, it's like, what are we trying to get to after when we're restoring a community? Like, and there's really no ideal community. So this idea of the climax community being the best community doesn't really, is not really thought to be correct these days in ecology. So some ecosystems are disturbance adapted. And when you have regular disturbances, then they tend to be able to, these ecosystems, they tend to be able to rebound quite quickly from a disturbance and go back through those successional stages. So when we talk about fire adapted ecosystems, those are the ones that have periodic fires on a regular interval. And that has created this natural selection for plants and animals that can survive those periodic disturbances. And so that would be a disturbance adapted, or in this case, fire adapted ecosystems. So that is another thing to consider, is that sometimes ecosystems require disturbance in order to have what the community that is that community for that ecosystem. Okay, so we'll talk more about this.